Hey everyone, and welcome to another instalment of board games I got rid of and why. So this is a series where I talk about all the board games that I've kicked out of my collection and tried to give some rationale as to why I came to that decision. Before I get into this episode's 10 games, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, Kienda.co.uk, who are a great online retailer here in the UK, and if you use my discount code in the show notes, then you can get 5% off your first order. But without further ado, let's get started on the episode. The first game I'm talking about this episode is Tinker Tailor, which is a small box hidden roles drafting game. Think of something like Citadels. So this one works very much in that vein, as you are using these powers to collect these different cards to give you set collection bonuses. That's pretty much the extent of the game. It worked for what it was. I think one of the lasting impressions I had on this game was how annoying and how drawn out the kind of housekeeping process was, as you had to go through all of these different roles every single round and activate them in order. It just became a bit tedious after a while and just become a bit, as I said, annoying. But the game worked. I thought it was fine, but ultimately nothing that really made you come back to it anymore. And to be honest, I don't think it is as good as the classic Citadels. So hence why Tinker Tailor left the collection. So the second game I'm talking about is Not Alone, which is a hide and seek one versus all style game that was actually in my collection for quite some time. So we did actually play this one quite a few times over the years. I actually prefer this game at the lower player counts, either 1 versus 1 or 1 versus 2, with two people being the Marines or whatever they are. And basically this game, you have a display of these cards out, all representing a different location. And then secretly, both all the players who are the Marines and the alien themselves are going to select a card and the aliens try to guess where the Marines are going to go to, and the Marines are trying to evade where the alien is going. Because every time either party is successful, then they're going to climb up this track, and the first person to reach the goal or the destination spot on that track will be the winner. I thought the game was fine. I thought it was one of those games that suffered from the whole, I know that you know that I know that you know kind of thing, and it come to a point where it was pretty much random and you could just do a lucky dip and maybe get lucky and maybe not get lucky. So I thought that was quite frustrating at times. I also thought that some of these action cards that the alien could use were a bit swingy. Sometimes they were ultra powerful and there was nothing that the other players could do about it, and then sometimes vice versa, it would kind of spiral out of control. They would get so many locations on the board that you were pretty much just hoping, or just selecting one and hoping it would work out. So a little bit too random for me, but it did have its upside. I think if you like these style of games, this is a good example of a pretty interactive, a pretty tense game that you could get some fun from. The next two games on this list are kind of tied hand in hand, and the reasons are similar as to why I culled both of them. So these games are Watergate and Blitzkrieg. So these are both tug of war style games, as you are dragging kind of a piece up and down this track, trying to get it on your side and to beat your opponent by doing so. In Watergate, which I think is the better of the two games, at least in terms of kind of mechanical experience and the way it's designed, as one player is going to take control of the press, one person is going to be President Nixon, and through clever card play, you're going to be manipulating these different tokens on this track, and then laying down kind of a network to try and connect and expose the scandal if you are the press player. But if you're President Nixon, you're trying to cut off this network and block off any route you can and just try to stay in the game as long as you can. So I love the victory condition in this game. I love the level of card play and how to sacrifice cards to get more powerful abilities but lose them from your deck. There was just a lot to be appreciated here from a great designer. I just kind of got to a point where I'd never pull this one off the shelf. I thought this was kind of more mechanical than it was fun for me. Now, I still do give this one a 7 out of 10, which is enough for a shield of quality because I think the game design is that good. It just wasn't one that I was looking to experience very often, and I kind of want games in my collection that I play regularly, or at least have that urge to play regularly. But I think if you love tug of war games, this one is pretty much as good as it gets. But yeah, unfortunately, not quite right for my personal collection because I have quite a few two-player games, and I'd likely pull a lot more of them out before I would get to Watergate. Blitzkrieg is very similar in terms of my reasoning. This one I think is slightly weaker mechanically, but probably has a higher fun factor, as you are drawing tokens out of a bag, and then using those tokens to climb up different tracks. Some of them have special abilities. It has this kind of bonus actions you can get when you place these discs down, or these tokens down. And it had a good degree of kind of bottlenecking you into doing certain things without giving you too many options, but giving you enough options to mull over. And there was 2 different versions of this game as well, a kind of simplified version and a more kind of interconnected version, which to be honest, I thought I preferred the basic version more than the advanced version. But very much similar to Watergate, there was just a ton of other 2-player games in my collection, and I rarely get to play two-player games. So this one was kind of not really seeing any, or showing any sign of seeing the light anytime soon. But still, both recommendations from me if you enjoy that tug of war experience and you regularly get 2-player games to the table. The next game I'm talking about is Mikarinos, which is actually a near miss for me, and I thought this game has another game with a lot of upside to it. So this is a very abstract area majority style game, as you're simply placing these cubes down on these different tiles, which are basically grids, and then spreading out and trying to get majority on these tiles, because at the end of the round, if you have the most coverage on these tiles, you're going to collect those tiles, which will give you bonus powers for the rest of the game. But additionally, that will tie hand in hand with the main board, where you could invest in, which will kind of correlate to the tiles you've collected, so they would multiply in their scores. It was very clever, as dry as it gets, and to be honest, the artwork as well, and the visual design and graphic design for the Mikarinos version of this game were not exactly going to draw people in, and no one's going to come around your house, look at your collection and say, let's play Mikarinos because that looks fun. So I thought that did work against it somewhat, but again, mechanically the game is very well designed. This game has also been released in a much more visually appealing version called Rome, which I could see more people being drawn to just because of that visual appeal. But in this game, I played it a few times. I did enjoy every single play, but it did get to that point where, you know what, I'm content with it now. I've tried all the different powers. I've tried the different strategies you can go for, and every kind of play from now on, I'd probably do the same thing. So when I get to that point with the game, I'm ready to pass on from it. But still, if you see a version of this game out in the wild and you find it at a good price, I do think it's worth your time, and I think you could enjoy it. So that is Mikarinos. The next game I'm talking about is Unmatched, Cobble and Fog. So this is a skirmish dueling style game where you are taking control of these characters, all with very distinct, unique abilities. This version has characters such as Sherlock Holmes, it has the Invisible Man, it has Count Dracula, and I forget who the other one is. But basically you are navigating around this map, playing cards and basically beating the snot out of each other. Now, I must admit, going into this game, I was pretty sure that it wasn't going to be for me because, to be honest, that kind of gameplay doesn't work for me. I don't tend to like dueling or skirmish style games where you are beating the snot out of each other. And yeah, my concerns were certainly did come true. However, thinking from a more objective standpoint, I can see why people would enjoy these games. Much like games like I mentioned, Watergate and Blitzkrieg being great examples of tug-of-war style games, Unmatched is a great system for fans who enjoy those dueling style games. But yeah, ultimately it's just not a good gel with my own personality or my own style of games. So it was never going to get played. I had a few games with it, I kind of embraced the chaotic nature of them, but I did have my limit and I was ready to move on pretty quickly from Unmatched. The next game I'm talking about is Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion. So the reason I picked this game up was because I thought I had to experience what the hype was all about. This is regarded as one of the best games of all time, not only this version but also the original Gloomhaven. This is a dungeon crawling style game where you have control of your own character. You are leveling up as you go throughout the game. You have this really interesting card system as you are picking a pair of cards which also represents your health. And then on one of these cards you're using the ability from the top half, and on the other card you're using the ability from the bottom half. And they can be things such as moving around the map, attacking characters, and and the like. So I did actually appreciate the way this game worked. I thought it was very clever. The scope was massive. It has pretty much everything you'd expect and want from a dungeon crawling style game. And to be honest, if you like stuff like Dungeons and Dragons, but you think the actual gameplay side of things in relation to Dungeons and Dragons is weak, then Gloomhaven is a great substitute for that, because the actual gameplay is quite, has a Euro nature to it and it's quite gamey. So I did quite like that blend of things, that kind of dungeon crawling narrative mixed with a solid gameplay experience. Now, the reason this game left my collection was because generally narrative games with a campaign or legacy style games don't work for me, because I like variety. I like dipping in and out of games rather than committing to one game and having a lifestyle experience. So for that reason, the very nature of Gloomhaven wasn't going to work for me. But I did know that going into the game, but I did want to experience it anyway. We played quite a few missions back to back, all in one night, and I got to a point where I was like, I know what Gloomhaven is about now. I understand how the system works, and to be honest, I've increased my knowledge of the board game world, because I thought it was a bit of a grey area for me, that I felt like I needed to at least experience Gloomhaven to have that kind of knowledge in my system to compare it to other games. So yeah, ultimately one that's not right for me. It was a little bit too rules heavy, a little bit too fiddly for me, too many exceptions, too many situational rules. And also I thought that the narrative side of the game was quite weak. It was quite cliche, and it felt like the most generic fantasy story you could think of. But that being said, the gameplay itself was certainly well polished, and if you like more or kind of a hybrid of a narrative and Euro style game, this one is going to be it's quite remarkable, but not quite right for my personal tastes. So that is Gloomhaven: Jaws of the Lion. The next game I'm talking about is Broom Service, which is one of the original Alexander Pfister games. So this is actually a much lighter system, and it's a pick up and deliver style game as you take control of these witches, and you are moving around this board, picking up potions and dropping them off at these different towers to get points. But the thing that was unique about this game was this card system, as everyone would have an identical set of cards or deck of cards, and then in turn order you'll be selecting these cards secretly and then revealing them, and then you could choose to either choose the brave version of these actions or the kind of cowardly version. And the cowardly version would relate to you thinking that another player would have chosen that card, and if they had, you'd all get the cowardly action. But if you chose the brave action, you're basically saying that nobody else has selected that card, and then you get a stronger, almost like a double action to be a lot more efficient. But if somebody else does select that card, then you get nothing. So I did like that kind of push your luck, bluffing and guessing mechanism, and it did work well for this, and it made the gameplay vary as you went on. You weren't all playing from a level footing all the time. So I thought this game had a lot going on for it. I did like the way it worked. It did take a few turns to get it out your system and understand how it works, but once you did understand it and it clicks, the game started to flow quite smoothly and was a decent amount of fun. Now, I do think this game was quite one note. I thought that once you played it a couple of times, there was no real reason to go back to it. I thought that there's better pick up and deliver games out there, and I even have ones in my collection that I rarely get to play because I do play so many games that I just know that if I wanted to play a pick up and deliver game, I was going to play something like the Oracle of Delphi before I would even think about playing Broom Service. But in its own right, Broom Service was a solid game. Plays in a pretty succinct amount of time. You're talking about 45 minutes to an hour to play, and the level of decisions there is quite interesting. And I'd love to see that cowardly and brave mechanism be used again in another game, because I've not seen it before, and finding unique mechanisms is becoming tougher and tougher nowadays. So yeah, I did like that about Broom Service, but ultimately it wasn't the best of its genre. The next game I'm talking about is In the Hall of the Mountain King. So this is a game that still holds my shield of quality. I think this is a very well designed game, as you are building up this pyramid of cards, which is going to be this awesome way to gather and manage your resources, because every time you build or add a new card to this pyramid, everything below it is going to restock on resources, and then you're going to use those resources to buy new abilities. You're going to use them to basically dig out different pathways on this big board to build this network of tunnels, which works basically in a polyomino style way. Then you are finding these statues, you're dragging these statues onto these kind of platforms to get other victory points. A lot going on here, and actually remarkably easy to teach and to understand, and to be honest, it was a lot of fun. Now, this game certainly did get lost in my collection for a long time. I went through that initial burst and playing it quite regularly, then all of a sudden it just never got played. It was just sat there on my shelf collecting dust, and the queue of games before, I was thinking of getting some back to the table, just started building and building and building to the point where I just knew it wasn't getting played. It'd been sat there for like a year or so. But I thought, you know what, this is still a fantastic game, but I have to be realistic here. I have to create space to something that I've got a bigger desire to play sooner. So hence why In the Hall of the Mountain King left my collection, but I still love that resource system. And the final game I'm talking about this episode is Acro Theory, which is one of those games where on paper and visually, I thought this game was going to be a smash hit for me. I was very impressed from reading the rulebook about how streamlined the game was and how well it seemed ironed out. This is a pick up and deliver tile placement style game as you're building up this map, which is going to make up different islands and different routes connecting those islands. And the supply and demand aspect of the game relating to the pick up and deliver really did appeal to me, as you would sail around these islands, collect them in your little boat, bring them back to the main island and collect money for doing so. You'd use that money to buy contracts and then use those contracts to build your temples on these islands based on arrangements of symbols around those islands. So some might say, to complete this contract, you might need a mountain to the north of it or a volcano to the south of it and so on. And once you find that perfect island, you can put your temple on it and unlock more actions as you go. So very smooth and streamlined set of rules there. Now that being said, I thought the game did lack a certain amount of fun. I just seemed to be underwhelmed after every game of this I played, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why. And much like Broom Service, I have my favourite pick up and deliver games, and if I was to keep this in my collection, and I must admit this was a very near miss because I loved the way it worked, this would be again pushed further down on that list, and it was never going to get played. You know, this is relatively quick, you're talking 30 to 45 minutes, but I would rather spend, you know, an extra half an hour or so to play something more meaty and more engaging, like, as I mentioned, Oracle of Delphi. So whenever I pick up and deliver game, I automatically compare it to Oracle of Delphi, which is one of my favourites, and no game has yet to compare or stand shoulder to shoulder with that game. So hence why Acro Theory left the collection. So there we go, there's another 10 games that have left my collection. Hopefully this video has been somewhat informative for you. If you have enjoyed the video, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel and check out my other content too. And particularly if you enjoy this kind of content, I have got, you know, a multitude of different videos talking about games I've culled from the collection, so check out that playlist. Also be sure to check out the show's sponsor, kiendo.co.uk, and if you want to go that extra step, then you can also check out my Patreon page. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye now.